One. There we go. Very good evening to everybody. Good evening to everybody, and welcome to this Thursday, the 18th of June, Piano Hour with myself, Christopher Daigen. Thank you very much for joining me again. This is the first 5 or 6 minutes or so before our proper performance starts at 6 p.m. So just to welcome everybody, just to remind you, make sure that the stream and everything is working correctly. We have a very interesting, very warm, hopefully warming program for you this evening. For those of you who are in this part of the world, in KZN in particular, you'll know that it is very cold. I think this is one of the coldest days I've ever experienced in Pietermaritzburg. It's not only been cold, but it's rained the whole of last night. It's very wet. It's been grey the whole day, and everything feels very, 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 very cool indeed. So we're really hoping that the music is going to warm your hearts this evening. We hope you have opportunity to sit by a fire, maybe over a heater with some warm soup, and maybe your feet and your mittens or your gloves on to keep your hands and your feet warm if you need to. Maybe a glass of wine if you'd like that, and just enjoy the next while from 6 o'clock onward for approximately 45 minutes or so. With us in Piano Hour, very warming and hopefully very enjoyable selection of music for you tonight. And tonight's program I've put together is a compilation of really interesting stories. It was really wonderful to get the feedback that I asked for last week. I was asking for feedback from everyone who was watching about the experience due to the dislocation that we have here between myself and my home and my studio now. I have very little idea of how people are experiencing the music. So instead of having an audience in front of me, seated next to me here, I know that the audience is now at home, but I've got no idea how you're experiencing it. So I was really pleased to hear from so many people about when and how they experienced the performances or the live stream sessions. So I have a better idea, and if you'd like to, please keep them coming. Do let me know. Really excited, and it's interesting to hear about that. Thank you, of course, also to everyone who supported this project to make it feasible, to make it possible, to keep these live streams free across various platforms on Facebook, YouTube, etc. And thank you, of course, once again to Kevin Little, Big Beat, Pietermaritzburg's premier audio and visual promotion company, who are providing the sound and the audio. And that's, of course, you noticed how that has improved dramatically in the last few weeks since Kevin has been managing and really providing some fantastic setup for us. Of course, the last item to draw your attention to is, once again, if you are able to support us with general donations, that would be very helpful. We really do support that. So I'll be starting a few screens now just to bring through some information about that. And then we will start the performance itself at 6 p.m. This, of course, is the little screenshot from the promotional video that I created for this week's program. A selection of images about fire, soup, wine, and enjoying the luxury and the warmth of beautiful music. Of course, this whole selection of this is our 23rd live stream. I'm losing count. 23rd live stream that we have now presenting since March. And this is all now part of our business, or my company, Christopher Daigen's Music Revival business, that I've been created about 25 years ago and been running ever since. And of course, this is all happening on our live stream projects. It's a way of bringing our performances together. It's a very, very exciting possibility to meet audiences, traditional audiences, as well as many new audiences. We understand, obviously, that there are many new audiences who are meeting us and enjoying our presentations. As I said, the music will start at 6 p.m. exactly. So this evening's presentation is going to be, I've put together a title of Look and Listen. I was very encouraged by the number of people who responded and said, well, they really love the music, but it's also a great entertainment and a great opportunity for them to just experience some new music and some new interesting facts and ideas about music, the music that I'm playing and presenting. So this evening I've included a number of images, just various composer images, music images. You'll see as they go through. It's very interesting to put the faces to the music in a little bit more detail about the people involved as we go through. And I hope you enjoy this extra aspect that we'll be bringing through to the presentation tonight. Gosh, even the image, I'm looking at myself on the screen here, I can see that even I'm looking a little bit bluer, a little bit colder than normal. Quite possibly, it's just the temperature change. Right, well, it is 6 p.m. on the dot, and I have removed the strap so that we can see everything that goes on. Welcome once again to everybody. And thank you again for joining us. 6 p.m. is when our performance starts. My name is Christopher Daigen. This is our piano hour on Thursday, and this evening's program, Look and Listen, comes to you with a selection of very interesting, very beautiful music and some interesting stories, as I said, with some visuals attached to it as well. I'm going to start off this evening's program playing from my trusty iPad. You can see it already fired up and ready to go. Hopefully it's not going to run out of power tonight. I think it should be okay. And I'm going to start off with two pieces which are not often played in the concert halls, one of which is very well known and the other of which is very obscure indeed. In fact, I'll be very surprised if anyone has heard the second piece. So the first of which is a very popular melody in F by the Russian composer Anton Rubinstein. Here is Rubinstein himself. Rubinstein is acknowledged as one of the great founders and fathers of the Russian piano school, together with his brother Nikolai Rubinstein. Anton Rubinstein started the conservatory in St. Petersburg, Music Conservatory in St. Petersburg. His brother Nikolai started the conservatory in Moscow. And together they are said, but particularly Anton is said to have established the modern school of Russian piano playing, a style of playing that particularly was inspired by his own performances, which were very passionate, had a very strong attack, a very noble tone. He was very renowned for producing a very rich, noble sound at the piano and great dramatic flair. And in this melody in F, you'll hear that. I will try to recreate some of that noble sound in the piano, just to keep with the right style. But you will hear very interestingly, the music is created in such a way that the melody is shared between the thumbs. So it sits in a very rich middle part of the piano in general. And it's a very interesting texture and a very unique way of creating a melody. Instead of on the top, accompanied by chords underneath, the melody takes place in the middle, shared by the thumbs with chords on either side. And the second very interesting piece of music is by composer Friedrich Kalkbrenner, who was German by birth but spent most of his time in Paris. He was born and lived just after Beethoven, Haydn, and Mozart, and in France he spent most of his time there, and he became very successful, very wealthy. And as a musician, after the death of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, he considered himself to be the greatest pianist alive, which is very interesting considering that we don't hear much of him these days. And in fact, when a young virtuoso pianist from Poland by the name of Friedrich Chopin arrived in Paris in about 1825, 1830, he invited Chopin to study with him at one of his private schools. Chopin obviously must have been impressed because he did actually dedicate his piano concerto in E minor to the composer Kalkbrenner. But the piece by Kalkbrenner I'm going to play for you is The Size of the Aeolian Harp. Very interesting little title and piece of music which refers to the imitation, which I'll show to you now on the music, a little device which was very fashionable in the 19th century at the time, a little box that had two wires attached to it, and when it was placed near an open window, the wind would cause the two wires to vibrate in a very resonant, the harmonics would sound. And so they would give this beautiful sound of two wires vibrating together, something like this, which is what you hear in the music. A very sort of atmospheric, ancient, hark back to ancient Greece and the idea of a very classical notion of nature making music itself. So then these two pieces are the start of this evening's program, the melody in F, by Anton Rubinstein, and the size of the Aeolian Harp by Friedrich Kalkbrenner. There we go, two compositions for you. The first of which, the Melody in F by Anton Rubinstein, and the second of which was the Romance, the Size of the Aeolian Harp by Friedrich Kalkbrenner. As I mentioned, a very unique and interesting texture there of Rubinstein's playing with dividing the melody between the thumbs. And it seemed to really get the better of me there at one point. Complicated stuff. Sometimes it's better just to memorize the music and then watch the hands and you know what's going on, instead of trying to watch the music. Goodness. So I'm going to go into a set of three minuets. Minuets being a 17th, 18th century court dance, the very elegant, very light, steady-paced, 3 beats in a bar prelude, you might say, to the waltz, or the precursor, at least, of the waltz, but a very elegant and refined piece of music. And many composers wrote minuets, especially for entertainment, maybe even for dancing, but also the elegant simplicity of it and the small scale of the piece made it quite possible for young composers and amateur composers to write minuets. So I'm going to play 3 very famous minuets for you, and the first of which is by this very famous gentleman over here. Now, we all know this portrait. This is, of course, the great J.S. Bach, thought by many to be the greatest composer of all time. And Bach was a very prolific man. He wrote an incredible amount of music, and he also had, can you believe it, 22 children. I mean, how on earth did he manage to write all that music and have 22 children? Well, he had 10 children with his first wife, and then she died. And then he married his second wife, who is this Anna Magdalena Bach, and then had another 13 children with her. How incredible. Now, Anna Magdalena was an accomplished musician and singer, and she was a brilliant pianist, a harpsichordist, at least the precursor of the piano, and gave up her career as a singer to marry Bach and devote herself to not only looking after his 22 children, 13 of which were hers as well, but also to help him promote his career. She copied vast quantities of music for him and really supported him enormously in his music activities. At one point, and one of the most famous books that we have is the Anna Magdalena Notebook, which is a book of keyboard compositions and songs that Bach wrote for her and that she wrote down, copied from Bach's various sources, including this very famous minuet, what I'm going to play for you now. That is the original version. That is from her or Bach's handwriting in the book. And I like the way they ran out of paper at the end and then just added a few lines at the bottom instead of using a new page. But what is really astounding about this is that in recent years, this very well-known piece of music has been discovered to not be by Bach or by Anna Magdalena, but by this gentleman here, a man by the name of Christian Petzold, who actually was the composer of these very well-known pieces. So it's fascinating for me how these ideas and these melodies, which we know, we all think this is Bach, and then 100 or 200 years later, we discover that in fact it's not. It was somebody else. The second minuet, which I'm going to play for you, is this charming gentleman here, who is the very famous Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And here he is 6 years old. This is a brilliant painting, a very famous painting commissioned by Mozart's father, thought to be by the artist Lorenzi, Italian portrait painter. And this is Mozart at 6, and the piece of music I'm going to play for you, he wrote when he was in fact 6 years old. And this is what the original manuscript looks like in Mozart's own handwriting. This is one of the first 2 or 3 pieces. For those of you who follow Mozart's music, the cataloging number of Mozart's music goes from K1, from the musicologist Mr. Köchel, who catalogues Mozart's first compositions from K1 to the Requiem, his last composition, which is K626. This is, in fact, K1, the first official manuscript and piece of music that Mozart wrote. And the third minuet I'm going to play for you, and they're all ironically in the same key of G major, by a 23 or 26-year-old Ludwig van Beethoven, This is what Beethoven looked like when he was 26. What I didn't know is that Beethoven was one of 7 children. I had no idea. I always thought that he was actually an only child. Obviously, his father's attention and abuse was focused on Beethoven himself because of his desire to prove that he was the worthy successor to the genius of Mozart. And the Minuet, which is in fact this Minuet in G, which is very well known, Beethoven composed when he was 23 or 25 years old. What I didn't know, and I discovered today, that in fact it wasn't written for piano. And I always wondered about this because it's often a piece of music given to beginners, but it's actually very, very hard. It's unpianistic. It doesn't fit under the hands very well. And the reason being, in fact, that Beethoven originally wrote this for orchestra. The parts for that, the original parts and manuscripts are lost. And this is an arrangement, a version for piano of an orchestral score that Beethoven wrote. So these are 3 very unique and quite intriguing little minuets, all in G. I'll play them one after another, but I'm sure you'll pick up who is who. rather fascinating and innocent, beautiful, simple music there. Really delicate music, delicate textures. 3 minuets there, first of all by Bach, not by Bach, actually by Christian Petzler, contemporary musician, and copied into Anna Magdalena's notebook. Second by the 6-year-old Mozart, and the third by the 25-year-old Beethoven. As a young composer, really making his mark and not scored for piano at all. In fact, it was supposed to be an orchestral composition, and that is an arrangement of it. And just to show you again, this is the original, the first edition, not the manuscript, but the first edition of Beethoven's score. Now, at this point, I'd like to play for you one of my own compositions. It's always interesting to be able to include this in the Thursday evening's program. And I included this picture last week, which I've used a number of times in my presentations, and people have asked, where is this beautiful venue? Well, this is in fact at Hilton College. This is a performance at the Hilton College Chapel during the Hilton Festival. And a beautiful venue. And I've just come to think that, in fact, this is a great link to the piece of music which I'll be playing for you this evening, which is called Hilton Road. But it also got me leading to the idea that, in fact, I've had the opportunity to play in some very beautiful venues, and I'm going to share some of those with you now. This is a wonderful photograph that was taken with a performance with orchestra at the Palau de la Música in Barcelona. This was really a fantastic, one of the highlights of my career, to play with the orchestra there. And in this picture, you'll see I was sharing the stage with the wonderful saxophonist David Sayeras. And this was a really fantastic performance, not only because it was really just a great opportunity to play this wonderful music in such a fantastic venue and such a brilliant orchestra, but you can't see in these pictures, this is actually what the venue looked like. It really is one of the most spectacular venues in the world, and that is the stage, and I was on it. It really is amazing to look at that picture and think that I was actually there playing in that incredible venue, one of the most beautiful venues in the world, the Palau de la Música in Barcelona. Moving locally, just briefly, this is in fact a wonderful shot of the Pietermaritzburg City Hall. The Pietermaritzburg City Hall is renowned as one of the finest acoustics in Pietermaritzburg, in South Africa at least, for orchestral music with the very fine organ, over 100-year-old organ, a really magnificent City Hall, and also looking beautifully, thanks once again to Big Beat, who provide fantastic sound and lighting for those concerts. This particular performance featuring the Drakensberg Boys Choir. And another very beautiful venue in Pietermaritzburg where I play regularly is the Tatham Art Gallery, really one of South Africa's premier art galleries, Municipal Museum of Art, and one of the finest collections. And I do a monthly concert there with guest artists. We have a really fantastic piano, a brand new piano, bought 2 years ago, a fantastic acoustic, and it's such an inspiring and wonderful venue to play. It's surrounded by these incredible artworks. And the last beautiful image from a festival last year in Latimer in England, I was invited by my colleague Mark Nixon to play here. I'm on stage with Shelley Levy clarinet and Sarah Roberts the viola in a beautiful small chapel in church in Latimer, beautiful village, beautiful town. And unfortunately, I was supposed to be going to play there again this year, but that obviously will now not be happening. So just some beautiful images of some of the wonderful places I get to play in and make wonderful music. I'm going to go on to another selection of pieces, and if you didn't like Minuets, just hold on for 1 second, because I am going to play one more for you, and that is by the composer Franz Joseph Haydn, but this is a very unique piece of music. Haydn always has, it seems to be a unique twinkle, a glint in his eye, and a sense of humor in his music. And he writes this piece of music, and I'm going to share it on the screen for you. It's a Minuet alla Rovescio. And even if you can't read music, you will see by the shape of the notes in the first line, if you look at the shape of the notes on the first line and then compare them to the shape of the notes on the second line, it is in fact the first line in reverse. And this is exactly what Haydn asks the pianist to do, to play the piece of music twice and then play it backwards in reverse twice. And then the third line is the trio. You're asked to play that twice, and then you'll see the fourth line is a reverse version, a backward version of the third line. So again, in the trio, you would play the third line forward twice and then backward twice. And he writes it in such a way that even if you just follow the general contours and unique details of the lines, you will hear how it goes backwards and forwards and still makes perfect sense, which is really extraordinary. And straight after that, I'm going to play a wonderful piece of music by this gentleman, who is Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. This is a wonderful portrait by the Russian artist Viktor Serov. Very beautiful portrait of Rimsky-Korsakov. Korsakov wrote this amazing opera, a very long opera called The Tale of the Tsar Sultan. And in it comes this wonderful short piece of music called The Flight of the Bumblebee, which I'm going to play for you this evening as arranged by the pianist Sergei Rachmaninoff. Now, there's a long story. The opera is a very substantial story. I'm not going to tell you all the details. But it takes several hours. And the story really revolves around the Sultan himself and his prince, the young prince. The prince, his mother dies, and this father takes on a new wife, a wicked stepmother who does not like the prince at all, and banishes the prince eventually from the palace to a magic island. On this magic island, he meets a magic princess who happens to be a magic swan, and casts a spell on him and turns him into a bumblebee. And when he is in his bumblebee formation, he flies back from the magic island, flies back to his father and stings the wicked stepmother, tells the wicked father about all the terrible things that the stepmother has done to him, and of course the story ends happily after. And that takes several hours for that story to take place. The piece of music itself, The Flight of the Bumblebee, is when he's flying in his bumblebee formation. It's about 2 minutes long. So it's probably actually going to take quicker for me to play it than for me to actually tell you the whole story. So yeah, first of all, we have Minuet by Haydn and The Flight of the Bumblebee, and I'll come back to the Hilton Road composition in a second. short and sweet. The Flight of the Bumblebee from Rimsky-Korsakov, played by Sergei Rachmaninoff, and before that, the Minuet from Sonata number 26 Sonata by Franz Joseph Haydn, the Minuet alla rovescia, or the reversed forward music. I hope you picked that up, enjoyed that detail. So I said to you, I was talking earlier about Hilton Road, one of my own pieces, and I'd like to play that for you now. It's from a set of 4 KZN landscapes that I wrote. The piece of music, as I was thinking about actually creating it and what it really entails, is that Hilton, that road to Hilton College, through Hilton actually for myself, has had many important experiences. It always seems to be like a journey to somewhere, and I think of all the occasions that I've driven along that road to play concerts, or in fact it was the first road that I ever drove a car on. That's where actually I learned to drive, partly a long time ago. And it seems to me that there's a recurring refrain, a hymn, that comes back in this piece of music. And it seems like much of the music I've been playing this evening, that often we have the opportunity to experience something or see something and then see it from a completely different angle and learn so much more about it as our lives and our perspectives change. And I wonder how much of that is happening in each of our lives at the moment with this lockdown and this situation that we're finding in ourselves to reevaluate and contextualize many of the experiences we've taken for granted. So this is my own piece, Hilton Road. There we go. A unique refrain, that hymn-like refrain that returns again and again in a different context, maybe each time. A piece of my own composition, Hilton Road, from the 4 KZN landscapes recorded on the album Indigo, with David Sayeras, a saxophone player. I seem to mention David Sayeras almost every concert. Goodness, we'll have to have him when he's able to travel from Spain. He'll have to be here on one of our live stream concerts. And one of the things about the music that I've created or written, not only for saxophone but also for piano, I'm finding that a few people are asking me about whether these pieces are written down, and very few of them are. This is one of the few that is written down in any version. And I actually am looking at exploring this opportunity. So if you are interested in playing some of these pieces, if you're a pianist or a saxophonist, I think, and you're interested in playing some of this music, do please drop us a message either on my website at Music Revival, or on one of my emails, or WhatsApp, or Facebook. Just looking forward to hearing from people. If there is an interest in this music, then certainly I can write it down, create it, and make volumes of original pieces that people will be able to play. The program, I think, is going to end off with 2 compositions for you this evening. The first of which, back to my images here, is by the great Scott Joplin. Scott Joplin, one of the few African-American composers of his time that had formal classical piano lessons, formal classical training as a composer and as a pianist. So he studied music theory and music harmony, and his music is really steeped in the traditional classical framework and the really a great understanding of classical style, which is why his ragtime music, which really brings together the idea of a mix between European and African music in the sort of earliest forms of jazz, you might say, ragtime really being this mix of different cultures. And his music, unlike many of the other ragtime composers, is distilled and based in this classical music construct of harmony and melody that is based in traditional classical terms. What I find uniquely interesting about so many of these pieces is that they, in fact, have the most fascinating covers. Each piece of music has a very interesting cover to it, and this is the easy winners, not the most well-known of Scott Joplin's music, but really a very charming and lovely, very lilting piece of music I'm going to play for you here. And then I'm going to end off this evening's program with a piece of music by a gentleman who was born Jacob Gershowitz and changed his name to George Gershwin. He was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants in America, and really has one of the most unique combinations of combining again the idea of classical and jazz together. And I'm going to play one of his own song transcriptions. In other words, he wrote the song My One and Only for a musical in, where did I write this down? 1927, called Funny Face, the song My One and Only, and it became a popular song that he rewrote as a piano solo. Well, in fact, he recorded this in a sound recording, and a pianist subsequently wrote every note down, which is incredible. Gershwin himself was adept at doing this because he had spent the early part of his career, so I included the image on the right, at the piano at what they would have called a piano plugger. This is now in the early 20th century. A department store in New York would have received a large quantity of new sheet music and new songs, no radio, very few record players. Maybe even then, I'm not sure if there were even phonographs or records invented, but the piano plugger would be on hand, and you would take him the new piece of music for him to play and to see if you liked it. And if you liked it, you would buy the sheet music. If you didn't, you would leave it there. And so Gershwin had to rearrange and at sight create brilliant piano versions out of sight reading songs that he had never really seen before. And so his versions of his own songs become incredibly exciting and incredibly virtuoso playing, full of energy, full of notes, that I'm going to play for you this evening, of his song My One and Only in his own sound recorded version. But before that, Scott Joplin's very beautiful The Easy Winners. the Scott Joplin rag, the easy winners there, and ending off with George Gershwin's own version of his popular song, improvised version of his song written down note for note, not by me, thank goodness, and of his popular song, My One and Only. That brings us to a few minutes to 7 and the end of this evening's piano hour with myself, Christopher Daigen. Hope you've enjoyed the selection of music, the selection of images that have followed through this evening. On Saturday, I'll be playing another varied selection of music for you by Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, and Ravel. So a very varied classical program on Saturday night. Please do join us then, and if the usual announcement, if you're able to support us, please visit our website to find out how you can offer donations via the Yoko platform, via EFT, etc. And we are really, really grateful for everyone who has been supporting us, making these live stream sessions possible. So we're now entering number 23. Thanks once again for the fantastic sound and audio, sound and visual material that are coming through via Kevin Little at Big Beat, who is supporting us, has been doing so for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And look forward to seeing you at our next session. Keep warm, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us.